A CEO on thin ice. A meeting that can make, or break, herself and her company. And just when all seems lost, a gentle voice down the hallway alters the fate of an entire business. What do we find when we put resumes aside, and really look at people? This story is for you if you're one of those who thinks that genius tends to be hiding in plain sight. It began with a voice. Soft, clear, unexpected, like a tune flowing into the wrong room. A dominant CEO stood stock-still in his office, looking through the half-open doorway at someone he'd seen in the hallway 100 times. A janitor's daughter, 12 years old, a quiet presence no one really noticed. Until today, his business was in the balance. Millions of dollars, dozens of employees, decades of reputation, all on the line. The very individual he desperately required had disappeared, and time was running out. And then a child said, in impeccable French, "We prefer to believe we are familiar with where talent resides. That titles and degrees are the only currencies that hold value. But what if the individual best equipped to save it all is not the one holding the title, but the one no one expected? What if brilliance wears scuffed sneakers, bears a mended backpack, and travels alongside us every day, quietly watching, waiting not for approval, but for a moment?" This is a tale about a kid who broke down every expectation on one afternoon. About a dad who'd raised a girl quietly to believe in herself, even when the world wouldn't. And about a man who learned, far too late, that the individuals we take for granted are the ones we need the most. It's a tale of what happens when we stop judging potential based on looks, and begin listening more intently to the voices we've learned to ignore. So let me transport you back to one typical day, in one typical hallway, where everything collapsed. Damn it, this can't be happening. Richard Donovan's voice thundered down the corridors of Donovan Industries, thick with stress and incredulity. The 54-year-old CEO was sweating right through his $3,000 suit as he paced his office high up on the 40th floor. Within 45 minutes, Group Marseille's executives would be walking through the door for possibly the largest meeting in the company's history. $100 million worth of medical tech contracts were at stake. But now, when everything needed to be flawless, tragedy had struck. The professional translator, crucial to the meeting, had just cancelled due to a family crisis. "Mr. Donovan, I've called every translation service in the city," said his assistant, Jennifer, her voice shaking. "It's the night before a holiday. No one's available." She hesitated, then added, "The French team insists on using their language. French only. No exceptions." "There must be somebody in this city who speaks French perfectly," he bellowed, slapping his hand against the table. "Anybody?" Just at that moment, a small voice wafted in from the hallway. "Dad, you left your wrench on the cart." Richard stood stock-still. He glanced toward the door, half open, and beheld a girl, perhaps 12 years old, passing a wrench to one of the janitors. She was speaking French fluently, politely inquiring whether he needed assistance with the tools. "Jennifer," Richard whispered, gaping. "Did you hear that?" "Hear what, sir?" "That child." She was speaking French. Jennifer peered out the door and frowned. "Oh, that's Amelia. She's Joseph's daughter. She came to pick him up. School let out early today." Richard sat up straight, observing Amelia more intensely. She was in a school uniform with scuffed sneakers and lugging a backpack that had surely been better days. In this slick, high-strung corporate environment, she seemed utterly out of place. Like a wildflower pushing its way up through a crack in the sidewalk. But her gaze was unflinching, unruffled, shining, and even as the grown-ups freaked out around her, she remained completely calm. When Amelia caught sight of being observed, she grinned and waved demurely. The assurance in that single action brought Richard up short. "Joseph!" Richard shouted, moving out of his office without a second thought. The janitor spun around, surprised by the CEO's sudden notice. "Why yes, Mr. Donovan. May I speak with you for a moment?" Richard asked, waving him over. Joseph approached, his eyes suspicious. "Is something wrong, sir?" "Your daughter," Richard replied hastily. "Does she know French?" Joseph blinked in surprise at the question. "Yes, sir. Amelia's a very intelligent girl. She learned French, on the computer and at the public library. She's always hoped to study abroad in France someday." Richard saw a flash of hope for the first time that day. "How good is she?" "Well," Joseph replied, looking over at Amelia, "she speaks with French tourists every day. We're volunteers at the art museum on weekends. They're always amazed," Joseph replied softly, regarding his daughter quietly proudly. Amelia had already picked up on the fact that all eyes were upon her. She moved forward, unruffled and collected, and gazed up at Richard Donovan. "Can I assist you, Mr. Donovan?" she inquired politely. Her English was perfect, but there was a guarded politeness in her tone, like someone brought up to show respect for one's betters and select one's words wisely. Richard stooped to her level, his mind racing. This little girl, not even a teenager, might be his salvation, or his company's downfall. Having faith in a 12-year-old to negotiate a multi-million-dollar deal was crazy. But what else could he do? "Amelia," he started softly, "I need someone who is fluent in French. There is an extremely critical meeting taking place in 40 minutes. Would you be willing to assist?" Amelia's eyes sparkled, a combination of wonder and resolve flashing within them. "What sort of meeting are we discussing? If this tale of unexpected bravery and surprising opportunities resonates with you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. You're about to hear how one schoolgirl instructed a roomful of executives never to judge a person by appearance." "A very serious business meeting," Richard echoed, being diplomatic with his words. "We're discussing simultaneous French executive translation. It involves a $100 million deal." Amelia's expression changed. She nodded slowly, her face intent. "I perfectly understand, Mr. Donovan. I can do it." Joseph intervened hastily, fidgeting. "Sir, if I may say so, Amelia is only a child. This may not be." "Papa," Amelia said gently in French, touching his arm. "I'll show you what I can do." And she went back to Richard with tranquil assurance. "Mr. Donovan, I learned French because of my grandmother. She was from Haiti, and she only spoke French. She brought me up until I was 6, when she came to live with us." Richard's chest tightened. He'd lost his father at that same age. The memory was sharp, like a photograph frozen in time. But still, part of him hesitated. "Amelia, this meeting, the future of the company depends on it. If it goes badly, if something slips, then I've lost everything." Amelia didn't blink. "But if it goes well, you've gained everything. So what's really the difference between taking a chance on me, and giving up entirely?" Jennifer stepped in quietly, holding her phone. "Mr. Donovan, the French just confirmed. They'll be here in 35 minutes. And security says reporters from the Financial Times are in the lobby. If this meeting bombed, it wouldn't be a loss. It would be a bad, public, embarrassing failure." Richard's hand was shaking as he ran it through his hair, attempting to calm himself down. He remembered his grandfather, the Italian immigrant who had started this company from scratch with his own 2 hands. Now, the entire legacy lay on the shoulders of a 12-year-old black girl in tattered sneakers. The irony hurt. He'd always thought himself to be progressive, open-minded. But now, with the stakes actually being something tangible, now that his career was at risk, he caught himself feeling something else rising up within him. Fear, skepticism, perhaps even unconscious prejudice. "Amelia," he said deliberately, "you have to realize, these men are rough. They test professional translators to their limits. They'll ask technical questions, very detailed ones." "I know," she answered in a steady voice. "I looked up Group Marseilles on the internet. They're tough, sure, but they have respect for people who actually know what they're doing." Richard blinked. "You looked them up?" Amelia smiled, barely. "When my dad said there was a large meeting today, I was curious. I used the library at school during recess." She stood up, as calm as always. "I discovered that the CEO, Mr. Dubosi, lost his wife 2 years ago. It was a medical mishap, one that could have been avoided with improved technology. That's how he's so invested in healthcare innovation." Joseph stared at his daughter in awe. Even he hadn't realized she'd done that much. Jennifer leaned forward once more, her tone pressing. "Mr. Donovan, they're stuck in traffic. ETA, 20 minutes. Richard's heart raced again. 20 minutes. That's all he had to transform a schoolgirl into a suave translator, or see the business his family had established fall apart before reporters and investors. He addressed Amelia again. "Is there something else you want me to know about you?" he asked, hoping, pleading, for something, anything, to put his mind at ease. Amelia looked at her dad, then at Richard. "Well, I also know German and Spanish. And I debate in French-language debate competitions in school. I won 3 first prizes this year," Amelia said nonchalantly. "In debate," Richard straightened slightly. "What is the debate about?" "On subjects such as business ethics, corporate social responsibility, and innovation in technology," she said. "My instructor says that I have a talent for reducing complicated concepts to understandable language." Richard stared at her in wonder. This was more than a bright kid pretending. This was a young mind who had, without even knowing, spent her entire life getting ready for an opportunity like this. "Joseph." Richard faced the janitor. Why did you never tell me your daughter was this good? Joseph glared down, clearly self-conscious. Mr. Donovan, you've seen my daughter for years. But you've never inquired about her. To you, we're just background. The words hit home. Richard felt it strike something uncomfortably real deep within himself. He'd always thought of Joseph as reliable, respectful, quiet, the kind of worker who never requested anything and never caused him any trouble. But now he saw that he'd never really looked at him at all. He had never taken the time to consider the man's life, his family, or what sort of genius might be working undetected just beneath his feet. Mr. Donovan, Amelia said quietly, you're upset because I'm young, and because I'm black, aren't you? The words hit him flat-footed. He opened his mouth to answer, but nothing emerged. It's all right, she said softly, without any anger in her tone. I get it, but do you know the positive side of being underestimated? She smiled a small smile. It allows you the opportunity to surprise people. As Richard hesitated, caught between uncertainty and desperation, something in Amelia's serene, unflinching look started to awaken something within him. Something familiar. Something he hadn't experienced in years. The same bold flame his grandfather possessed when he gambled everything to develop Donovan Industries from scratch. 15 minutes, Mr. Donovan, Jennifer stated, her tone strained with anxiety. Security just confirmed, the French executives have reached the parking lot. Richard slowly turned to Amelia. She stood there alongside her father, utterly calm, as if she interpreted million-dollar business transactions before lunch every day. And that poise, it unnerved him, as if perhaps she'd been waiting her entire life for someone to offer her an authentic challenge. Amelia, he inquired cautiously, do you really know what's riding on this? If this doesn't go right, 200 men and women could be out of work just before Christmas. I perfectly see, Mr. Donovan, she replied, her tone as serene as ever. But may I make a question in exchange? Why are you more worried about how I dress and how old I am, than whether or not I'm really qualified? Once again, Richard remained quiet. Joseph moved beside her, obviously proud, but also guardedly so. This wasn't merely a flash of confidence. It was a confrontation of Richard's presumptions, voiced with astonishing lucidity by a man who stood half his height. Mr. Donovan, Jennifer intervened softly, may I have a word with you? Richard nodded and followed her a few steps down the hall, lowering his voice. This is insane, Jennifer, he said, betting the future of the company on a kid. With all due respect, sir, she interrupted, something she hadn't done in 15 years of working for him. I grew up in the same neighborhood as Joseph and Amelia. I've known their family for years. And Amelia isn't just smart, she's extraordinary. Richard scowled. What are you saying? She received a full scholarship to Riverside Academy, Jennifer explained. It's the city's most elite prep school. $40,000 a year, 5-year waiting list. Amelia got accepted at age 10. And she's been living winning debate competitions, in high schoolers. She fixed him with a stare. Mr. Donovan, Amelia Williams is a genius. The reason we don't recognize that as obviously as we should is because she doesn't appear to be the genius we've been conditioned to imagine. Richard's heart pounded heavy in his chest. A scholarship to Riverside? He'd heard about the school, wealthy, high-end, cutthroat admissions. How did a janitor's daughter gain acceptance? More, Jennifer continued. She knows Mandarin and Arabic. She spends weekends volunteering, teaching French to recent immigrants at the neighborhood church. Someone yelled from the hallway, 12 minutes. Richard turned back to Amelia once more. She had listened to it all, but she hadn't flinched. She had just waited patiently, serene and prepared. Why did you never tell me all this? He asked, his voice tinged with pain. Because you never asked, she replied softly. And there it was once again, that same gentle truth Joseph had said before. For years, Richard had passed by them, greeted them, perhaps even nodded in passing, but never really looked. Never pictured that there was genius behind the uniforms, the cleaning carts, the supporting roles. Amelia, he spoke, his tone softer now, if I give this to you, I have to know you can handle the heat. These executives, they push everyone to the limit. They shift gears abruptly, they speak in complex, technical language. I know, she said, unflappable. I researched them online, Amelia stated simply. Mr. Dubosi frequently brings up European medical regulations to see how good translators are at understanding industry requirements. And Mr. Lauren, he likes to include regional French idioms to catch out American translators. Richard blinked, clearly impressed. You researched them one by one. Lunch at school, she answered with a faint smile. I also read Groupe Marseille's previous 3 annual reports, their latest acquisitions, and the technical presentations they normally demand. She turned and smiled warmly at her father. Papa always instilled in me that preparation was a sign of respect. Joseph nodded proudly. My daughter never does things halfway, Mr. Donovan. 10 minutes, someone shouted from the hallway. Jennifer stood next to them, holding a folder. Mr. Donovan, I did executive summaries in French of our technology, just in case Amelia is able to handle the vocabulary. May I see them? Amelia requested graciously, already extending a hand. Jennifer passed her the papers, and Amelia's eyes read the pages rapidly, her brows sometimes creasing with effort. Within 2 minutes, she raised her head. There are some terminology mistakes, she explained softly. On page 3, intelligence artificielle medical would be preferable as système d'assistance diagnostique par IA. And on page 5, the term used for predictive analysis is old-fashioned. Jennifer and Richard looked at each other in shocked silence. A kid of 12 was correcting advanced documents done by professionals. How do you know that? Richard asked, the skepticism in his voice mingling with respect. My grandmother was working in a hospital in Port-au-Prince before she came to America, Amelia explained, looking at her loved one with warm affection. She taught me a lot of medical French words when I was a kid. She stopped to recall. She would tell me, the right words can save lives. So learn them well. 8 minutes, the call came. Richard sucked in a breath and made a choice that would remain with him for the duration of his life. Amelia, you're hired. But then his tone softened. I want you to know something. These executives, if they smell even the slightest hint of vulnerability, they'll pounce. It's not about people, it's just French business. I see, Mr. Donovan, she replied calmly. But might I give you some advice? He nodded, intrigued. Stop caring about what they'll think of you, she told him, and begin to care about why your technology saves lives. Real passion is universal, it speaks every language. As they made their way down the hallway to the conference room, something miraculous occurred. Amelia's unassuming confidence started to get inside of Richard. Her calmness wasn't only admirable, it was catching. His anxiety started to dissipate, gradually giving way to a sense he hadn't had for weeks, purpose. For the first time in a very long time, he wasn't obsessed with what was going to fail. He was beginning to think about what was going to succeed. Mr. Donovan, Amelia asked softly. Yes. There's something you need to know about this meeting. Something big. Something that could totally shift the way you're going to communicate with these executives. Richard halted his walk, perplexed. What do you mean? 5 minutes, someone shouted. Amelia's eyes gleamed, not with fear, but with determination. Like she'd learned something that nobody else in the firm had seen. Something important. Mr. Dubosi, she said when they approached the conference room, lost his 12-year-old daughter in a medical mishap 2 years ago. Her name was Amélie. That's just the French version of my name. Richard stood still. How did you know that? I peered past the business news, Amelia explained matter-of-factly. I read obituaries, news articles, interviews, anything I could get my hands on. She shifted her school backpack up higher on her shoulder and went on. Mr. Dubosi is not merely investing in medical tech. He's looking for redemption. He wants to save other kids, because he could not save his own. 3 minutes. Something changed within Richard then. He no longer viewed Amelia as a kid assisting in an emergency. No, he viewed her for what she was, a strategist, a thinker, somebody who had come to this meeting better prepared than he had. The doors of the elevator opened with a gentle chime that somehow seemed like the knell of destiny. Out came Mr. Philippe Dubosi, a gray-haired, dignified-looking man in his 60s. His hair was beautifully combed, his dark gray suit so refined it probably cost more than a year of Joseph's salary. Close on his heels was Mr. Lauren Russo, who was a bit younger but just as authoritative, carrying an Italian leather briefcase and with the expression of a man accustomed to not being impressed by American businesses. Richard straightened his shoulders and stepped forward. Gentlemen, welcome to Donovan Industries. I'm. Bonjour, Messrs. Dubosi et Russo, Amelia interrupted gently, stepping forward with calm confidence. Je suis Amélie Williams, et serai votre interprète aujourd'hui. She smiled warmly. J'espère que votre vol depuis Paris est bien passé, et que vous avez pu vous reposer malgré le décalage horaire. I hope your trip from Paris was uneventful, and that you managed to get some rest in spite of the jet lag. The room was electrically silent. Both men were motionless, their glossy executive faces dissolving into something much more exposed. They weren't only surprised by the fluency of her French, They were taken aback by her composure, the deference in her voice, the warmth of hospitality in what she said. Mon Dieu. Dubosi breathed in French, his voice shaking. Votre accent, il est parfait. Oh, avez-vous appris à parler comme ça? My God, your accent is perfect. Where did you learn to speak like that? Amelia smiled at him softly, genuinely. Ma grand-mère était haïtienne, monsieur. Elle m'a élevé en français jusqu'à mes 6 ans. Elle disait toujours que le français était la langue du cœur. My grandmother was Haitian, sir. She brought me up in French until I was 6. Always said that French is the language of the heart. Richard stood there in amazement as something totally remarkable occurred. Dubosi slowly went down on one knee to meet Amelia at eye level, his hands shaking. Quel est ton prénom, mon enfant? What's your name, my child? Amélie, she replied softly. Comme votre fille, like your daughter. The world held its breath. Dubosi shut his eyes and took a deep breath. When he opened them again, there was something raw and very human in his face, something Richard never believed would come from so great a man. Mr. Donovan, Dubosi spoke in English, his voice choked with emotion. In 25 years of conducting business across the globe, I have never encountered a translator so young, and so well-versed. He looked at Amelia once more. But what's more important than business, is what just occurred here. Rousseau nodded gravely. This child has treated us with more respect and compassion in 2 minutes than most executives do in a whole meeting. Richard stood in silence, humble, seeing his entire world quietly shift. Everything he believed he knew about power, preparation, brains, was being erased. For the next 40 minutes, Amelia provided a perfect translation of the entire presentation. Every technical jargon, every nuanced tone. She didn't interpret words. She translated emotions. She picked up on the fear behind the questions, the hope concealed under the numbers. When Dubosi posed a tough question regarding ethical application of AI in diagnostics, Amelia didn't simply rephrase it. She gentled it, wrapped it in human language, made both parties see what was truly being asked. Mr. Dubosi wants to know, she said softly, if our technology can avoid the type of diagnostic mistake that killed his daughter. The room fell silent, and Richard, shaken, found his own voice. Our technology exists so that no parent will ever have to endure what you endured. Amelia interpreted, then added something of her own heart. Je vous promets, monsieur, she said, que chaque fois que cette technologie sauvera un enfant, votre petite Amélie vivra encore, à travers cet acte d'amour. And I assure you, sir, that each time this technology saves a child, your little Amélie will live on, through that act of love. Dubosi wept. A man who had overseen $100 million investments. Openly weeping in an antiseptic boardroom because a little girl had discovered the words his most expensive therapists never could. When he finally spoke again, his voice was gentle but firm. Mr. Donovan, he declared, wiping away tears, we're not only putting in the $100 million we talked about. Richard's pulse accelerated. What? We will put in $200 million. And we would appreciate it if Amélie could be our official representative for this project. Rousseau nodded, equally emotional. She embodies everything this alliance should represent, heart, intelligence, and purpose. This child, Dubosi said, glancing once more at Amelia, understands the heart of medical technology in a way that takes most executives decades to learn. Richard looked at her, still seated calmly in her chair, as though closing the biggest deal in the company's history was just another part of her day. It was surreal. There's one condition, Dubosi said. We'd like to establish a complete education fund for Amélie. Exchange program at university in France. Paid for. A kid like this should never be held back by finances. Joseph, who'd sat silently throughout the meeting, finally spoke up. Gentlemen, I don't know what to say. Amelia looked at him and said softly in English, Papa, do you recall what Mama used to say? That God places special individuals in our lives at the exact moment. I believe today, we were all special people for one another. While champagne flutes clinked and contracts were signed, Richard stood in the shadows, observing, contemplating. A tide of unspoken awareness swept over him, one that would haunt him for weeks to come. Years, he had walked right by Joseph and Amelia in the halls. Never noticed them. Not quite, just background, he had assumed. All along, though, the one who would save his entire company, and demonstrate to him the boundaries of his own assumptions, stood right there, in front of him. And as the meeting ended and the French executives bid their tearful farewells, hugging Amelia warmly, Dubosi turned to Richard and whispered, "Sir, today, you didn't just hire a translator. You discovered a treasure that was hidden right in front of you." And even then, the greatest surprise was yet to come. Because while everybody else was toasting what they believed to be the conclusion of an incredible tale, Richard saw something in Amelia's shining eyes, something still but absolute. A spark that said to him, this wasn't the end. It was just the start. 6 months later, the change at Donovan Industries was impossible to overlook. The minute you walked into the building, you sensed it. A big portrait of Amelia Williams, who was now 13 years old, smiled from the main lobby wall. Below it, a shiny gold plaque said, "Innovation and Inclusion, recognizing talent where we least expect it." She became the youngest corporate ambassador in American history. Richard observed her leading a group of Japanese businessmen from his office window. They had come to explore the possibility of expanding the technology to Asia. And, typically Amelia-like, she had introduced her knowledge of Japanese casually, that she had learned just a week ago. That little tidbit had left such a shock on the visitors that they chose to double their initial investment. "It's out of this world, isn't it?" Jennifer replied as she handed Richard the new quarterly reports. "Company growth is 400% since that meeting. Amelia's a Harvard, MIT, and Stanford case study." Richard nodded, still attempting to comprehend how a 12-year-old, now barely a teenager, had been able to upend decades of ingrained bias in the space of an afternoon. What had begun as a crisis had become a revolution. An quiet one, yes. But deep. "Mr. Donovan," Amelia's voice came over the intercom, sharp and level. "The Toyota executives would like to talk about deploying the technology in Tokyo. May I book that for tomorrow?" "Okay, Amelia," he replied. Then, without thinking, "And thanks." The dynamics of how things got done at Donovan had altered entirely. Joseph was no longer simply the janitor. He was now operations supervisor, a position he had long ago been capable of but never given. Richard had finally realized what so many others had not, the quiet confidence of a man who had led a young visionary to compassion and discipline. "Dad always used to say," Amelia once said in a televised national interview, "that people only ever see what they expect to see. But once you stop judging by labels and begin to listen to the hearts of people, you see amazing talent in the most unsuspecting places." That interview had achieved viral status. Millions of hits. She was now an international icon for unutilized brilliance, and of the price of our own prejudgment. Richard remembered a phone call he'd recently received from Dubosi. "Mr. Donovan, our Lion Hospital alone has saved 120 children with your technology. Amelie learned something tremendous. Investing in humans is equal to investing in miracles." And then the most astounding thing, Amelia had not changed. In spite of all the news coverage, all the accolades, the education millions, she remained humble. Every day after her ambassador duties, she returned home to the same neighborhood, helped Joseph with chores, still taught French to new immigrants at the church, voluntarily. When a Forbes reporter asked how she managed a $2 million education fund at 13, Amelia simply shrugged. "Money is just a tool," she said. "And if you're not using a tool to build something good, what's the point?" The interview had gone viral, everywhere. Hundreds of American businesses, from Fortune 500 giants to scrappy startups, started reassessing how they found and developed talent. Executive boards convened emergency meetings. Talent procurement strategies were redrafted. And all because a 12-year-old girl had shown greatness doesn't always have a suit on or a fancy resume. That same afternoon, Richard had an unexpected visitor. Charles Hampton, the CEO of their competitor, Morrison Corporation, stood uncomfortably in the lobby. Morrison had controlled the medical tech industry for years. But in the past 3 months, they lost 3 significant international contracts, all 3 personally signed by Amelia. "Richard," Hampton started, clearly ill at ease. "I have to say, I totally underestimated what you've created here. My firm's been hemorrhaging talent for years. Because we've only ever looked in one direction. Pedigree, appearance, familiar names." Richard smiled low-key, recalling all too vividly how he himself had once believed the very same thing. "Charles," he said, "what I've learned is simple. Talent grows everywhere. We just have to stop looking only where we've always looked." Hampton nodded. "I'd like to propose a partnership. We want Amelia to help us rebuild our hiring process. We're willing to pay, whatever it takes." Richard shrugged. "I'll ask her. But knowing Amelia, she'll probably want you to invest in something bigger than just your company." And that's exactly what happened. Amelia consented to advising Morrison Corporation, but on one requirement. They needed to establish a $5 million scholarship fund for students from underprivileged inner-city communities. During her inaugural meeting with the board of Morrison, she uttered words that would be reprinted in business schools and newsrooms nationwide. Everyone has an amazing story. The difference is, who gets the opportunity to tell theirs? And who gets the opportunity to be heard? 6 months since the momentous meeting with Groupe Marseilles, Richard was still in awe of the young girl who had turned everything around. He gazed through the glass as 13-year-old Amelia discussed complex theories of artificial intelligence in smooth Mandarin to Beijing executives. Her confidence was natural, her brilliance was unmistakable, and all that kept him thinking was, this isn't even her final form. Joseph entered his office, now dressed in his sharp new operations supervisor uniform. Mr. Donovan, he grinned, Amelia asked me to remind you of the 3 o'clock meeting with the Chinese investors. She's gone over all the technical reports, Mandarin. Richard laughed in disbelief. Joseph, may I ask you something? Certainly, sir. How did you raise such an amazing daughter? Joseph's expression softened with pride. Mr. Donovan, Amelia's always been this way. The only variation now is, someone's final. At times, the best lessons are learned from the most quieted of moments, when we observe beyond the surface and really see each other. We all come across points where our presumptions mar the view, and it is only through soft reflection and receptivity that we come to understand the untapped strengths that surround us. What truly counts isn't where you are from or what you appear as, but the heart and bravery that you bring to the table. This tale reminds us that patience and kindness can reveal genius waiting quietly to be noticed. It's a gentle reminder to reevaluate the ways in which we perceive and open ourselves to the surprise blessings within others. Perhaps we will discover the next time we take a moment and truly see that we have a treasure where we least expect it. Reflect for a moment on who you might have missed, and how that can make all the difference.